and today I'm going to be talking about my experiences and learnings from having done so far 100 webinars. This is webinar 101, literally and also metaphorically. I am just waiting for a couple more people to come through the door, and we'll get started. A little bit of a change in the presentation model here for reasons that might become evident as we go through this, but you're seeing a slightly plainer version. Also, I want to share a few live screens and demos, so I'm sharing my whole Chrome tab rather than just the presentation, so you're seeing some other bits and pieces which you wouldn't normally see. Okay, but I think everyone's coming in, so let's get started. Articulate Marketing started doing webinars in 2000. We have delivered 100. This is the 101st webinar 101. And of those 100, 101, at least 90 of them were done by me. Some were delivered very brilliantly by other people. I was helped a lot through this process by my colleagues. I'm not taking credit for all the hard work that happened. And so this is coming from the heart. This is something that I have some direct, relevant experience of. If any of this resonates with you at all, please email me, matthew@articulatemarketing.com, with questions and feedback. I would love to hear from you. If you're watching this, definitely you're my kind of people. Thank you very much for coming. Right, let's get right to the business. Fundamentally, the reason Articulate Marketing does webinars is that they work. They do the business. They engage people, and you can see that in the graph on the right. This is the number of webinar form submissions, not necessarily new contacts created, but form submissions on our webinar forms from the beginning of time, back in 2020 when I started doing it. And you can see that it's fluctuated up and down over time, but it's averaging between 50 and 100 a month. And in the last, 6-9 months, it's been averaging of sort of 150 to 200 a month. That is a reasonably good flow of engagement. Not everyone is a new contact coming through here. In fact, most of these form submissions are from existing contacts in our database. About 80% that, about 20% net new, meaning first conversion on the webinar form. You can see a dip roughly from mid 2024 to mid 2025, when we stopped doing any webinars at all for, in retrospect, fairly stupid reasons. When you look at the graph, what is interesting is for a year we did no webinars, but we were still getting 30 or 40 webinar form submissions a month. And that's another benefit of generating leads with webinars, is that pre-recorded webinars still generate leads, even if you are not generating new webinars. I'm going to get into building pipeline a little bit, but you can imagine that that level of engagement, that level of communication, that level of trust helps with sales, right? This is fundamentally why we're doing it. And if I look at the history of the last 6 years or so doing webinars, it has contributed to generating £1.4 million worth of pipeline. And we're not a huge business, so that is a meaningful contribution to our sales pipeline. Obviously, other things like referrals and other sources generate leads as well, but from a sort of inbound motion. It's contributed, engaged with, touched, getting on for 5,000 contacts in our database. So there's 5,000 people in our CRM who have signed up for, not all of them attended, a webinar. And that's also very meaningful. I mean, just filling in the form has benefits, like we get to enrich the contact record, we get to drop a cookie if they accept cookies, and so on. So it had hugely beneficial in terms of actually building relationships, mid-funnel, bottom-of-funnel relationships with important people. And the fact that it's touching quite a lot of sales qualified leads is also very important. I'll get onto that a little bit as well. So I'm showing you inside the factory here. These are actual statistics from Articulate. Your mileage may vary, but it has been a very powerful marketing to sales motion for us. It also, as a proof point for this trust and engagement point, talks very nicely to people who we want to talk to, right? So you can see that by far the largest number of sign-ups. Now, this is not form submissions, this is contacts, and it's a slightly different time series, but the largest number of people who've signed up our webinars for register for one of our webinars, I should say, are sales qualified leads. Then there's a whole bunch of disqualified, and we disqualify if you use a webmail address. So that's basically indicating the number of people using Gmail addresses to register. Leads are sort of pre-MQL qualification, and the next category is former opportunities. So people who've been through our sales process but didn't end up buying from us. So sales qualified leads, former opportunities, marketing qualified leads, really high up there in that list. And if you look at the inbound lead gen for on average for white papers or sort of generic inbound gated content, it's going to be skewed very much in a different direction. So it really is talking to exactly the right kind of people. And the other data point is very many of the people who sign up for our webinars sign up for several at a time or several in succession. And partly, I mean, having signed up for one, we're going to email you about the next one. We also have about 1,800 people who've explicitly said, I want to know when your next webinar is. They've signed up for a webinar updates and newsletters. So there's a really tremendous engagement, multiple touch engagement. For some reason, bless you, hello if you're here, people are interested in some of the things I and we at Articulate have to say, and this is a really good forum for delivering it. The other thing that I think is very subtly important about trust and engagement is it's the difference between live theatre and television. I am actually sat here at 10:07 on Wednesday morning. I'm looking at my clock just to make sure I give you the right time. Live. I've got my dog here having a nap with me. This is not sort of canned. It's not sort of scripted. I'm doing it live to an audience. That keeps me on my toes. Also, I find it fun, but it also keeps me honest to do it. I'm actually contributing my own presence to this. This isn't something that's been cooked up by AI. It's a trust and engagement. And the contacts that are coming through and engaging with our webinars are very highly qualified, and we do a lot of contact enrichment. We do a lot of work in HubSpot to classify our contacts, and you can see that, I don't know if this is going to zoom, well, it will zoom, but not in a helpful way. The largest proportion of the people who are registering for webinars are marketing leaders. We're a marketing agency. They're the people we want to talk to, followed by business leaders. And they're the ones with the budgets. And we want to talk to them too. Sales leaders, not so much, apparently. So the people who are coming through are really good. The no value, the unidentifiable, probably, again, people using Gmail addresses, so we can't go and enrich their contacts and identify them as easily. Similarly, and let's see if we can, yeah, we can zoom that in. So where we know, I'm using a new presentation thing. I built this presentation in Notion, which is a fairly heroically simplifying thing to do. More on that perhaps later. Where we know the sector that they're in, and whether it's a target sector of ours or not, again, apart from the no value people who are probably webmail addresses, very highly concentrated in the kinds of audiences, B2B tech companies fundamentally, ideally in the health and software and environment sectors. And, you know, so that is really working. It's actually letting us talk to the kinds of people we want to talk to in the kinds of sectors we want to talk to about stuff that matters to them. Fantastic. Right. So what have I learned from doing 100 webinars or being involved in 100 webinars? I've got a series of lessons to share with you. The first thing is what you say matters a lot more than the chrome around it, okay? I think that people get put off the idea of doing webinars because they think they've got to stage them and they have to have 4 people on the webinar and, you know, have a presenter and they need a film crew and a studio. And not everybody gets that and wants that, but it raises the barrier to getting started enormously. And, you know, me, my study with my dog does sort of 98% of the communication work that I would do in a studio with a fancy camera and a director. And actually the fancy camera and a director adds to the complexity, cost and time. Also, and I think this is something I'm painfully relearning, when I started doing it, I used an app from WeTransfer called Paste, and it was the simplest presentation tool on the planet. I mean, it was nothing like PowerPoint. You could literally just type stuff into it. It looked actually a little bit like this that I've got by doing Notion. And then we went to pitch.com because Paste got shut down. And pitch is a lot more like PowerPoint. And I found doing pitch presentations like PowerPoint, you spend an awful lot more time fidgeting around with the design because you can move every pixel. And it's just the effort to communication ratio is just wrong with that. So I think fancy slides get in the way. My colleague Joanna did a really brilliant presentation last week about the psychology of PowerPoint, psychology of presentations, and she's going to deliver it as a webinar shortly, and it'll be out in the program soon. And she says, fundamentally, less is more. So I'm trying less is more. Lesson number 2, people get put off doing webinars quite quickly because they think it's complex and difficult to do. And then the first few they do, nobody signs up. If people do sign up, they don't attend. It all feels a little bit laborious. And just to give you some numbers, I mean, we would expect perhaps 20 to 30% of registries to turn up on the day. Perhaps the same again would look at the video afterwards. We send the recordings afterwards. And a lot of people sign up for webinars just to get the slides and the video. That's fine, I understand. A fair number of people aren't going to come along and watch the video at all. It doesn't matter because they've registered. We've got their details. We can invite them to the next thing. They've become aware of us. At least they know we want to talk about some of this stuff. So even a registration without a viewing or an attendance is valuable. If they don't sign up, you probably haven't promoted it properly, or your subject matter audience fit is wrong. Big tip, if you talk about AI in any webinar title, people will turn up for that, apparently. So, if nobody is signing up, you've still recorded a talk. You can still cross promote the content, turn it into a blog, turn it into social. I've done webinars where I've actually recorded the thing and nobody's arrived. Fine, I got a recording, I got a video out of it. I still turned up and did it. Some people would give up at that point. Did I give up? No. Was it Bob Monkhouse who said, when I was a kid and I told everyone I wanted to be a comedian, they laughed at me? Well, they're not laughing now. Anyway, if you have the webinar, people sign up and they don't turn up, you need to think about repurposing that contact. You need to think about improving the process, like reminders and things. And the one time I did a webinar, had a power cut. I went and bought backup batteries out of 100 something webinars. And by the way, when I do 100 webinars, sometimes I do a morning and an afternoon session, so it's probably more like 150 transmissions. So I was going to give you some stats. So for this webinar today, Webinars 101, it's an interesting topic, I think. We have, 45 or 47 registrations. So you might think, well, not huge numbers, but if you're doing that every week and you're engaging people and people are interested, in this recording live right now, there are 10 people live attending. Hello, thank you very much. I really appreciate it. Probably I'll get another 10 to 15 this afternoon when I bring in the US audience. So in this case, pretty good attendance. I'm judging by this morning's numbers. In other cases, less. The best webinar we've done was one on AI, and live and post transmission pre-recorded more than 750 registrations, and that's really powerful. The best in the last year has been about 150. So it's if the effort is calibrated against the results and you continuously optimize, you can learn from failure and make it better and still make it worthwhile. Okay, I've made that point. Right, things you don't need. You don't need a producer. For the first 40 or 50, perhaps a few more, my former colleague, Maddie Leslie, used to produce, and she would answer questions and make sure that the audio was working and things like that. And it was reassuring for me to know that she was there, and she would slack me if I hadn't put my camera on and things. I've learned that I don't need to do that. We use riverside.com for recording. There are lots of webinar platforms out there, and they're pretty good. You don't need hand holding. I don't think you need live chat, and certainly if you're reading, thinking, presenting in real time as I am now, you haven't got time to be answering chat messages. I don't think you need to open up the forum for discussion. I think that's a format that can work really well, and I've seen it work quite well. Our accountants do really good open forum, open mic sort of webinars where they talk for a bit and then they open up for the discussion. A slight danger of those being hijacked. So I think there's nothing wrong with just sort of turning up and talking as I'm doing now. That's my take on it anyway. And I've already talked about fancy cameras and studios. But the other thing you don't need is performance anxiety, right? And I say this with great respect to the lovely people who took the time to attend this morning. If I really flub this and make a horrible bungle of it, only 10 of you are going to see that, right? Bless you, and I'll just record the one this afternoon, and that will be the one that goes out as the recorded session. So, the actual cost of failure or embarrassment or sort of muddling it up is pretty small compared to the cost of not doing it. I'm very comfortable talking, and I like public speaking and things like that. Hate spiders, but public speaking, no problem, no phobia there. I know that some people have more of a problem with that, but once you realize that there's very little risk and you can prepare your way around it, it's really not an issue, I think, for most people. And we've trained people to run podcast interviews who are initially very hesitant about doing it. Okay, so some things you absolutely have to have. I think you have to put work into promoting this. So when we send out a couple of email promotion blasts, probably in the many thousands, as well as to the sort of people who've subscribed for updates and things, people in our database. I think you have to be consistent and persistent at it. I think you need to be doing it, set yourself a plan of doing it monthly, fortnightly, weekly, and stick at it for a good amount of time. It takes a while to build that audience. I think you need an attitude of continuous improvement, of optimization, of developing your technique. And at first, you might want to rehearse more, you might want to prepare more, you might want to run trial sessions with your colleagues. And by the way, if your audience is in the tens of people live, running a rehearsal with 5 or 10 colleagues is pretty much a good simulation of what it's like talking to those people. It's not more than that. And most of us spend most of our days having meetings with that sort of audience in them. So nothing to be nervous of, nothing to be apprehensive about. As I said, AI is huge. For some reason, you put AI into a title and you get much bigger numbers. I'm a little wary of always talking about AI. I don't want to be an AI pundit, and I don't want to be an AI hypester. We have a fairly people-first pragmatic view of AI. But if you want to start with a topic, start with one that has AI in it and give some genuine value and opinion about it. That would be a good launch pad for your webinars. That's a number 5. From the beginning, because we are a HubSpot partner, we decided to do everything in HubSpot. Registrations, emails, promotions, landing pages, video hosting, yada, yada, yada. Well, not quite video hosting. We host the videos on Vimeo, actually, but we embed them in HubSpot. Mostly for very old historical reasons. If we were starting now, we'd host the videos in HubSpot too. And that was an interesting decision. It was a sort of drink your own champagne decision. It has produced a lot of work. It's a lot of HubSpottery to do that, and a lot of these platforms, Zoom and things, have really, really good, registration, sign up things that seem like they're going to take a lot of the work off your shoulders. I don't regret the decision, partly because it's commercially relevant for us to be able to do it in HubSpot, but mostly because it means that we control all the building blocks and the elements and integrate them really nicely. It's very on brand. We're not sending people off the site or to a different platform for any part of this except to actually watch the webinar, in this case with Riverside. Previously, I think up until last year, we were using Zoom webinars to host the webinar. So, you can interchange the platforms. I think the biggest payoff has come from the fact that we now have that HubSpot webinar data very tightly integrated into our sales and marketing. And I think you have to work a little bit harder. I've done a couple of Zoom integrations for clients, Zoom webinar integrations for clients. And you have to work a little bit harder to make it all tie up with that. It's doable, but it's a bit more gnarly. So this is now live in HubSpot. You can see that this is not all webinars. This is webinars from the last 12 months. You can see a lot of that 1.4, 1.5 million deal value is actually in the last year. So it's, I've got all of this reporting. I can see exactly who is turning up for webinars. When people sign up, I'm getting notified. My sales colleagues can go and contact them. I can contact them. It's all nicely integrated. And I think that's the benefit for us. Okay, moving on. Yeah, 12 slides out of 17, 20 minutes in, tracking pretty well. This is the first time I've done this presentation using Notion, and I haven't got some of the presenter slide stuff that I have in Pitch. So the downside, building all of those assets takes quite a lot of work. We're building landing pages, thank you pages, a lot of emails, like promo emails, registration emails, thank you emails, reminder emails. We take the webinar recording and we do turn it into social stuff. We blogify it, meaning we editorialize it and turn it into written content. There's a whole flow. Now, I'm lucky. I run and own a marketing agency, so I get my marketing wholesale, but it still costs time, right? And we've done quite a lot of quantifying and time and motion on this in order to do it carefully and properly. Preparing the webinar, the actual what you're going to say, and rocking up and doing it is about a quarter to a third of the work of actually running the webinar. This is a real revelation when we really dug into this. And that is a challenge. I think a lot of this work has to happen whether you do it in HubSpot or not. I think we've made a little bit of a rod for our back by wanting to do it a certain way and to a certain level of quality and so on in HubSpot. Probably 20 to 30% more work in HubSpot than if we just used Zoom's native webinar functionality and just dropped it into that. I think it's a better experience as a result, but it's more work. So, when you're planning a webinar campaign, thinking about doing that. Now, the good news is if we build out a webinar campaign for you and we're working on it for you, we've got the templates and the processes, and we've kind of ironed out the kinks and quite a lot. Whereas if you're doing it from scratch, you also need to plan and invest the time to work out your processes and build the first prototypes and things. That is probably in the order of days of time if you're doing it from scratch. So yeah, that's a challenge if you haven't got help. Lesson number 6, quality assurance testing is essential. Observing our experience in the last year, I think Maddie and I the process was a little easier and we were both a little bit painstaking. Maddie was very attentive to detail, but now we have more people involved in the process, that it's more of a team effort. And there's a risk with that things slip through the cracks. And we had quite a lot of webinars that had little mistakes. Emails went out the wrong day, they had the wrong information in, the link didn't work, that sort of thing. So we and those gears grind because we're trying to say, look, we know all about marketing, we know how to do this stuff, and then we make there's a little bit of people who live in glass houses shouldn't throw stones, but we live in a very big glass house because we produce a lot of content and we throw very, very little stones occasionally when we're not perfectly paying attention. So I'll excuse ourselves on that. But we really need to try and tighten that up. And I think SOPs have helped. And I'll show you our standard operating procedure, our process for webinars. This is part of an effort across the whole of the piece in Articulate to really document the processes for all the things that we do. So it sort of fitted in naturally to that. And I'll talk on the next slide, or on a coming slide, about automation. So let me share the SOP, and hat tip to Sean, who developed this. You can see why it takes so long. There's quite a lot of stuff that has to happen, right? This goes through how to get the call to actions, how to add it to ad event, and each of these steps has to work correctly with the right information. So SOPs, really, really important to do the testing, really, really important to have SOPs to follow. This is I think, a really big lesson from this. I talked about the tools that we use, Pitch and Paste and now Notion. My tutor at Oxford said to me once, you can use facts in your essay like a drunk uses a lamppost for support or for illumination. And I think it's the same with slideware. But people are rocking up to hear you if they're just coming along to look at the slides. You haven't created a webinar or a presentation, you've created a document. And the slides are there to help people navigate, to keep them on track, kind of remind me what I'm supposed to be saying. In 30 minutes webinar, which I think is about as long as anybody can stand, as Churchill said, the mind cannot absorb more than the seat can endure. You've got time to say 10 reasonably interesting things or kind of clusters of ideas. You probably can't try and get too much in. So one of the mistakes I've made a lot recently, is trying to get too much in, too many words on the page, too many points per slide. It's really hard. Secondly, this is a lesson from Joanna, 2 lessons from Joanna. The first sort of slide, in this case, webinars work, and the last slide, which you'll come to when I get there, are the ones that people will remember or that make the most impact. There's a sort of a trough of attention in the middle, right? And if people are reading the words on the slide, they're not really listening, because reading and listening go through the same pathway in the brain, says Joanna. And so I try and keep the words on the slide down to a minimum, and I'm experimenting with using emojis like I'm young and cool, or probably not young and cool anymore. They've probably moved on from emojis now. Last point, time spent faffing around with PowerPoint or Pitch and sort of adjusting designs microscopically to avoid making it look rubbish is time you're not spending thinking about what you want to say, or planning what you want to say, or finding something interesting to say. I literally think any minute spent on meticulously hand designing slides for a webinar is time wasted. Now, I would say that I'm a writer. My design colleagues probably going to shoot me for that. So coming too close to my conclusion, my peroration on this is something now that we're really working on right now, because if we've got all these hours of mind-numbing HubSpottery to do for every webinar, how can we automate that, right? HubSpot's got APIs, we've got tools, we've got technology, we know how to integrate things. So the goal is to get anything that is not thinking about interesting, clever things to say and then saying them. We're trying to reduce that time as much as possible so that we can do more webinars, because I think weekly frequency works better than fortnightly or monthly. And we can also spend more time doing the human stuff. And I think this is a really important lesson that I'm taking away, because the last few, possibly half dozen webinars, we've worked more as a syndicate, as a team. And my colleagues have been preparing the webinar, sometimes from reports that they've written, sometimes from their own research, and then I've been delivering them. And there's that sort of syndicate team collaborative thing relies a little bit on AI, relies a little bit on people passing the baton over. And I think the best effort is spent not on automating the content creation and the thinking, but on automating everything else. And I think the more time we spend on the clever stuff and the less time we spend doing stuff that can be automated, the better. And we've tried to solve the effort problem by automating the ideation, content creation. And I think that was a partial mistake. So we're learning from that. So here's the first fruits of this project that Sian is running with Kyle and my help. We are trying to solve the bits of the process that we hate the most first, right? And the most gnarly, irritating, mind-numbing, complex thing is it's on this date, and at this time in the morning, this time in the afternoon. Is it British summertime? Is it Pacific Daylight Time? If it's when do the time zones and the summer times change, and there's a week or two when they overlap and it's different? And how do we get all that right? And then how do we create this add it to your calendar button based on that, without making a mistake along the way and without having to open time and date and bake your noodle trying to figure it out? Just that, putting in the date and the 2 times and extracting 11 BST and the US time zones and extracting these links. This went live yesterday with a very clever, complicated Neato integration into Notion, which has the data of the webinars, and then it just does that. That probably saves half an hour per webinar and probably would have prevented 2 or 3 at least of the QA failures in the last year. And nobody ever wants to spend their time doing that. So this is the first fruits of our automation effort. Check with me in 6 months and we'll see how we've got with the rest of it. But my goal is we'll just come up with a brilliant idea for a webinar, have amazing things and all the HubSpottery and all the process flow. 9/10 of that checklist will be automated. So last slide, 1 minute over time. Sorry, thank you for your patience. Next steps. Webinars are a powerful tool to build your pipeline, build engagement, build trust with your prospects and customers. If you would like our help, or if anything that we've talked about here resonates, I would love to talk to you about it. You can just pick my brains. I won't give you a hard sell, no BS. But if we can help or you want to talk about it, I would love to hear from you. My calendar link is articulatemarketing.com/meet. That is my calendar there. Book a time. Let's have a chat. And that brings me to the end of this morning's webinar. Thank you so much for joining. Thank you for attending. I hope you found it useful.